inside these little
Yeah,
slots.
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was.
No worries, no worries.
And if you want,
move
we
it
can.
up so
Yeah.
we go the other way. Is
Yeah,
it good
I'm
now?
okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
now I'm
Yes.
perfect.
And here's
Okay.
what we'll do.
Yeah.
Put it like kind of more.
On the side.
So I think you can just go straight onto
Yeah, you
the
can.
pocket here.
Yeah, this is probably better. Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect. Now I get it. Thank you. I just hadn't seen it, sort of. Okay. All right, so at the beginning, sort of what was the feel? And I will tell you, it was a really important dynamic that set the tone, that had an effect, which was Representative Frank Chop's passing, Senator Bill Ramos, and then 2 days ago, or Saturday night, Senator Gildon, his wife suddenly passed.
Okay.
So we had 3 passings sort of in the legislative community during the session.
Yeah.
Just had an effect on everything.
That's such a good point.
So it really, you know.
Yeah, don't worry about it. That's fine.
Thank you so much for joining us for a special edition of In Session. I'm Christine Pei. The 2025 legislative session comes to a close after the legislature avoided a special session by agreeing on a budget proposal. In the last 100 days, legislators faced their biggest task, solving the state's budget crisis and closing a $13 billion deficit. We'll also discuss some of the bills that were signed into law and the bills that failed. So King 5's Olympia Bureau Chief Drew Mickelson has been following this since day one and joins us live from Olympia. So Drew, how did things go over the weekend? You're following this as well. And what comes next?
Yeah, Christine, well, they wrapped up their work at 6:30 last night on the 105th day of the 105-day legislative session. They were actually proud to get out while the sun was still up, which is not always the case here on the last day of the session. They knew coming in that they had a difficult task, and we kept hearing the word challenging being used to describe this session. But once they got into the budget negotiations, they learned that balancing the budget was going to be a lot harder. Much of the country went red on election night 2024, but not the state of Washington. Democrat Bob Ferguson was the clear winner for governor, and voters rejected 3 statewide initiatives backed by conservatives. Moves to throw out the capital gains tax, the Climate Commitment Act, and the long-term care law all failed. So, heading into the legislative session facing a budget deficit, the Democratic leaders of the House and Senate told King 5 they would look for efficiencies, but they felt residents would support increasing taxes.
The voters gave us clues about where we should do that. We should be taxing rich people and companies that can afford to pay more and that fairly should be paying more to support the services that we all benefit from as a community.
There will be an argument that that was a mandate on the past, but you're saying, hey, that's a sign that we should continue on this direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, certainly that's the most recent data we have from voters, right? Is the election results.
Thanks for the help. Appreciate it. Yeah.
But Bob Ferguson, even before taking office, made it clear he was skeptical of a wealth tax, and he wanted legislators to look at cuts first.
I recognize that's not going to be easy for agencies, but we can all be more efficient and more streamlined, and that's the type of approach we need to make before we even start having a conversation about any kind of taxes.
Hi, Bob Ferguson.
After his swearing in, he let legislators know his stance on taxes had not changed.
I'm not here to defend government. I'm here to reform it.
Well, let me tell you, Governor Ferguson, here's your team. Yep. We're ready to work with you on that effort.
Republicans were downright giddy. After 12 years of increased spending and taxes under Governor Jay Inslee, they found themselves giving the new governor several standing ovations. And when Democratic leadership proposed taxes on the wealthy,
we're not going to tax our way out of this thing. Not going to happen.
Ferguson did not budge. In February and into April, even after Democrats scaled back their tax proposals.
My approach is a balanced one. We're going to need some progressive revenue, but we need to make sure we're being as efficient and lean as possible right now as a state government. And so there was a proposal originally from the legislature of like 16 or 17 billion in taxes, way too much. More recently, they've come in at 12 billion. I said that is still too much.
If you watched his statements over time, I think you can see that he had a significant influence over the budget as it ultimately passed both chambers.
The title of the bill will be the title of the act.
In the end, Democratic leaders came up with a more balanced approach. The final budget calls for nearly $9 billion in new taxes, but no state employees would be furloughed. The state's rainy day savings account is untouched, and cities and counties would receive $100 million to hire law enforcement. On the tax side, the gas tax would go up 6 cents starting in July. Most business owners would pay more, along with the state's top capital gains earners. And a new electric vehicle tax would be established. For now, only Tesla would be impacted. Democrats said most in the state would feel the impact of the coming cuts.
For special ed kids, there's a lot more that we have to do, and we're not making progress at the rate that we need to be doing. And this is not even talking about our civil commitment, our inpatient beds, our substance use disorder treatment. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
Legislators came up with a budget over the weekend. What does Governor Ferguson think about these budgets?
Yeah, that's the $16 billion question, right? Because all of their work goes nowhere if he doesn't sign the budget and the transportation budget and the capital construction budget. If he doesn't sign those into law, they have to come back here to finish and come up with a plan that he will sign. He did not speak with the media at the end of the session Sunday night. He did put out a written statement saying he appreciated that the latest final budget was less reliant on taxes. You heard him there in the story saying that, you know, early in the year they were talking about $20 billion. They got that number down to about $9 billion. Is that enough to make him happy? We don't know yet. He said he's going to go through all of the budgets line by line over the coming weeks. He has 20 days to decide what to do with the budgets that he was presented last night. Back to you.
Okay, Drew, thank you very much. A big task ahead of him, that is for sure. And joining us live now is former state legislator Reuven Carlisle. So Reuven, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
There's a lot to break down, right?
Of course.
Can you talk a little bit more about the negotiations that went on this session? How did it go?
Yeah, as you can imagine, incredibly intense legislative session. You had just a huge dynamic with increase in the deficit at a level that people just did not expect, $13+ billion. You had deficits in the transportation community in terms of that budget, and then you had the uncertainty at the federal level. So all of that created just a profound sense of uncertainty, and it raised the tension level. And so as Drew reported, when they went into the session, they talked about the different options. So the last weekend, the last couple of days of intense negotiations were not just about budget and spending, but also about the tax side. And as he also said, the governor's uncertainty relative to that final step, we'll find out in the next 20 days.
We'll certainly be watching. And Reuven, what are some of the key differences in the House and Senate proposals that eventually led to the budget?
You know, they got to consensus on the issue. Take transportation, for example. The House had proposed about a 9-cent gasoline tax. The Senate came back with 6 cents. They sort of settled on 6 cents, but most of the money is on maintenance and operations. So taking care of roads and bridges and highways and all kinds of ferry investments and infrastructure investments. So, you know, on the operating budget side, you know, a lot of tension around extending a salary increase for public employees. That took a lot of money. And also some of the big categories around Medicaid because some of the pullback of the federal dollars. So lots of examples where 28% of the budget comes from federal sources. So you can see that crafting a budget over the course of 4 years is really challenging. And remember, in our state, we have that responsibility to do a 4-year balanced budget.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Reuven, turning now to the state budget, which took up a good portion of the discussions this past session. The Washington State Legislature, of course, as we've been talking, passed the 2025-2027 capital budget. What comes next, all of this? It kind of behooves the governor now. He has 20 days to look through this line by line. Yeah. It's a big task.
It is. It is. I will tell you that the lead for the governor, Katie Chapman-See, is a staff person in Olympia who's incredibly knowledgeable. She knows every line. She won't miss a footnote in this thing. But getting down to the details, she's going to look at the risks of the federal dollars. They're going to look at the expenditure of dollars in a whole host of areas around K-12 education, because nearly half the budget goes for K-12 education. So the issue around how local school districts, we have 1.1 million kids, 295 school districts. This year, we saw the biggest investment in special education in those school districts in state history. So that has a big effect on local school budgets, and they have to figure out how to plan for next year. So those are some of the issues that the governor in making the final determination. And remember, finally, in our state, the governor does have line item veto authority. So he could take out some spending or some programs that he didn't feel were justified.
Going back to that 6-cent gas tax, that's one that seems to have been a little bit more controversial, if I were to guess, because I've seen the political ads. How are people receiving this? I mean, 6 cents a gallon, you know, that's not insignificant at the end of the day.
It's not. But you know, I think the takeaway, and I think the public can appreciate this, the takeaway is that gasoline prices go like this, right? There's all kinds of global factors, war in Ukraine, the supply worldwide, the Middle East issues. So all of those factors are major drivers. The state gas tax in our state is very, very high. This 6 cents is not only 6 cents, but on top of that, it will index to inflation up to 2%. So it'll continue to go up over the next couple of years on an ongoing basis. The challenge, of course, in our state, we have sort of a unique tax structure, of course, in that we don't have a state income tax, so we have really high excise taxes. And it's not just transportation and gasoline, but it's also cigarettes and alcohol and marijuana. Those excise taxes are quite high in our state.
The no furlough part of this, do you think that there was an actual fear that that might go through, or was it pretty much a given that that was not going to happen?
No, I think that's a great question. I think there was a lot of sentiment that state employees, very tough to give a multi-billion-dollar salary increase at a time when there's so much uncertainty. Look at all the federal layoffs and federal job uncertainty. At the same time, the negotiated collective bargaining agreements were made by the previous administration, Governor Inslee, and then the new governor, Ferguson, came in and said he would accept those, but the legislature has to approve it. So in the final, I don't think it was said until this last week or last couple of days about whether or not they would be included.
So still relief there among these state employees.
Among the state employees, yes. That's right.
Anything about the budget and anything that passed that surprised you by chance? Or did it all seem pretty much as expected and normal?
No, I wouldn't say there was anything normal about this legislative session. I think Drew's coverage over the course of the entire session really showed that there was just a deep sense of disequilibrium and challenge and anxiety. Part of it is driven, again, by the fact that 28% of our budget is tied to the federal spending. And keep in mind that with the tariffs at the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma, you see just a real decrease in international trade. All of that's tied to our state taxes because we generate a lot of revenue because of our trade dependency and our activity. But remember, it's mostly agriculture products from Eastern Washington coming to the port here. Yeah, so big implications to the multiplier impact on our taxes. So that was a level of uncertainty that I don't think anyone was really prepared for.
Okay, certainly. Well, we have obviously a Democratic majority in both chambers. Let's go back to Drew Mickelson, who joins us again from Olympia. So, Drew, what have the reactions been from state Republicans because of all of this?
Well, as you can probably imagine, they were not happy. As you saw in our story there, coming in, they were, the word I used was giddy when they heard Governor Ferguson talking about reform and definitely not wanting to rely on taxes. So they were happy about that coming in. They're eagerly awaiting whether or not this budget gets vetoed. But they all session were saying that this balanced budget problem could be solved without raising any new taxes. That would have involved taking some money from the Climate Commitment Act, also renegotiating the contracts with the state employees that called for raises for them, and those were just not ideas that the Democratic majority was willing to tackle. There were also some policy bills that the Republicans were not happy about. The rent stabilization bill, the one that was passed on the final day of the session, a lot of negotiation on that. There will be a cap on landlords, assuming Governor Ferguson signs this bill into law, which he has not said yet what he's going to do on that bill. But that was one that Republicans really dug their feet in and tried to fight, and there were a number of Democrats who didn't like that bill either. Another one requiring clergy to report, becoming mandatory reporters if they see instances of child abuse. That was something that the Republicans fought. So the Republicans battled, but they didn't win a lot of those battles. And the big one was the budget. I think they were initially worried that there would be more reliance on taxes, but for them, this almost $9 billion was still way too much.
Absolutely, and we're going to continue breaking that down. And in fact, let's tackle some of the bills and go a little bit deeper into this, the ones that did pass this session and the bills that failed. Here's Drew Mickelson again with more on two controversial bills that lawmakers discussed this session.
Many of you might be asking yourself, why now? But you really should be asking yourself, why haven't we?
Lake Washington High School's AP Government class Monday,
as young females, this is something that's really important to all of us,
took place in a Washington State Senate hearing room.
As a group of young women entering college, we are scared for our future.
16 seniors, all young women, brought the idea to their state senator, Manka Dhingra.
This is really not meant to be onerous, but really meant to be a partnership to make sure all the patrons are safe.
Under the proposed law, all businesses with liquor licenses would need to have drug testing devices available to customers who want to see if their drinks have been spiked. The establishments would need to have signs posted designed by the students, letting customers know the resources available. The girls who initiated the bill say the tests would help prevent rapes.
These substances lower sexual inhibition and increase the risk of assault. Their side effects include impaired judgment, confusion, amnesia, unconsciousness, and more.
The state's Hospitality Association testified the law should only apply to nightclubs. The students say they'd be open to compromise, a traditional part of the lawmaking process.
Well, a couple summers ago, I came and I just toured the Capitol for part of my summer camp. And I never thought I would be back here, in the Senate, working on a bill that would actually affect people.
This is much more than a school project for the students. The law would go into effect in January, when they'll be freshmen in college.
There is this culture that we are about to enter next year that I don't know if we're ready for, but we need to, take a step to prepare for it because it does exist. And if we just sit back, nothing changes if nothing changes. So this is the first step.
Keep going, go, 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 go.
The push to lower the threshold to determine when a driver is drunk appears dead. One of the bill's sponsors, who thinks the move would have saved lives, says the votes just weren't there.
I think we need a lot more education. We need to make sure our members are comfortable. I think there's a lot of misinformation on what it takes to even get to a 0.05. People assume it's one drink, and that's absolutely not true.
Other bills on the dead list offering state-funded PTSD treatment for coroners and medical examiners, and the push to change the signature gathering process for initiatives. The bill that kept the House working until the wee hours, making changes to the Parents' Rights Initiative passed by legislators just last year. Republicans say it's working, but Democrats say educators want clarification. For example, do they have to inform a parent if their trans student reaches out to a counselor?
I think we'll fix that, make it much more clear how schools should be operating, what parents and kids should expect.
It's obviously disappointing because I think that parents in our state are continuing to feel like they are being pushed away from their children, that the state believes that it can do a better job of caring for its children. And that's not a Republican-Democrat issue.
So former state legislator Reuven Carlisle is here to really break it down for us. There's so many bills to kind of sift through. Let's focus a little bit more on the one about parental rights. Lawmakers approved changes to that initiative that went into effect last year. The initiative gave parents the right to access school materials and their child's medical records. Tell us more about this one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a challenging bill, right? Because there was a citizens initiative to the legislature, and the legislature adopted that initiative. And now they're coming back a year later, and they're making adjustments that Democrats say are really modest. Republicans have been very upset in suggesting that it's not modest, that it does have big implications about parents' ability to access the medical records of the students. The challenge, of course, is that you have 295 school districts, 1.1 million kids, and managing and navigating for those school districts what the laws are at the federal and the state level is not easy. And I think that was the intent of the legislation, was to clarify what those access to that medical information is. But I think it's really representative because the Republican opposition on this one felt very strongly that it was a philosophical issue. And I think there's a deep understanding and appreciation that local control of school districts has a tension with state level policies at times. So that's what this bill was really representative of.
And moving on to another bill that passed, Senate Bill 5480. This one prohibits medical debt from being reported to credit reporting agencies or credit bureaus. Medical debt is exempt from being included on someone's credit report. Sounds like this could be helpful for certain groups.
Yeah, you can imagine the number of people in our state who have bankruptcies and who have debt driven by medical bills and hospital bills. This is a policy, very interestingly, that the Biden administration had tried to make federal, and the Trump administration rescinded and pulled back on that policy. So now Washington State, the governor is expected to, or did sign this bill, and it will really have an effect effect on those folks who have been deeply impacted by medical debt. You can imagine that you could destroy your entire credit record with one incident of an inability to pay a hospital bill. So I think there's a lot of public support for a policy like this, and you can imagine why it was popular, not only with the new governor, but passed in a bipartisan fashion in Olympia.
Certainly, I can imagine that a lot of people are relieved from that one. One bill that I found to be very interesting, House Bill 1321. This prohibits a military force from another state, territory, or district, like another state's National Guard, from entering Washington state to perform a military duty unless given permission by Washington's governor or under the direction of the U.S. president. This one was very fascinating to me. What might have been the impetus for this one?
Yeah, this is really driven by the number of states that have begun to send National Guards members to the southern border. Yeah. Now, we, of course, are a border state with our friends in Canada, and I think you can imagine a level of discomfort if other states' National Guards were to come to the Canadian border in Blaine and Sumas and take some type of activity associated with trying to serve as additional border agents. So the tension with the Trump administration on the issue of immigration, the issue of border security in the particularly the southern border is an issue. And of course, the Trump administration argues that the northern border is also allowing fentanyl and other drugs in. And there's a lot of disagreement in Washington state. So this bill would prohibit other states' National Guards from being able to be deployed in our state without the permission of our state's governor.
That is very interesting, and it's a very direct reaction to the current administration now.
That's
okay.
Right.
So there are a few bills that lawmakers passed and that Governor Ferguson has not signed yet. Just last night, Drew was touching on this. Lawmakers passed a bill capping rent increases. It's a compromise bill that caps rent at 7% plus inflation or 10%, whichever is less. Rent is a big issue here in the city of Seattle, of course, and King County. This one was contentious. It was passed over the weekend. Your thoughts on this one?
Incredibly controversial. Really, as Drew said, it really shut down the House. It shut down the Senate. There were back and forth negotiations for a long time. The issue, I think, ultimately was that affordability of rent is, as we know, a huge issue. At the same time, landowners and landlords argue that you need more supply. You need to construct more housing in order to have pressure on rents go down. And so the issue around rent control is really driven by this question of the tension between density and availability of housing, but also the protection of renters. And so it was not only controversial from a partisan point of view, there were a few Democrats that also opposed the policy, but it really opens the question of whether or not you're going to see a reduction in the development of additional housing because of this cap.
That's really, that's another part of it, is there enough housing to accommodate the growing number of people who are coming in here? For landlords, though, of course they don't like this, and you have to think about them and what they might have to go through if this does indeed happen.
Well, and property taxes go up, and construction costs go up, and so there's all kinds of challenges for folks who are the landlords here. Landlords. At the same time, I mean, I think you can see among the public probably a pretty popular sentiment that 7% or up to 10% is not unreasonable.
Sure.
So I think you have a public tension there in terms of it being popular, but it having sort of broader economic implications as well.
We'll see how things go on that one.
Yeah.
Another bill that still awaits some potential signature. Lawmakers also passed a bill making clergy mandatory reporters of child abuse. Your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, there's a number of states that have a number of exemptions or requirements. So teachers, of course, and daycare workers and others, if they suspect child abuse, they have to report it. This is, of course, has different implications in that clergy who the sort of the sacred relationship that an individual has with their clergy is now required to report suspected cases of child abuse. And so this is something that took many years to adopt, many years of consideration. I think a lot of deep reflection, as you can imagine, among legislators with the discussion with clergy to talk about whether or not that violates that sacred relationship. And so, a bit of tension on this one, and it took a number of years before it was making its way through the process.
Gotcha. All right, so finally, lawmakers passed a bill that mandates excessive speeders have a device in their cars preventing them from going over 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. This was spurred by a deadly crash in King County in 2024 that killed a woman and 3 children.
Yeah.
How is this one being received?
Yeah, you know, on this one, I think you can appreciate when there's a terrible, tragic story like we saw in this case. You know, the law now says that if you're in a zone that you're going above 40 miles an hour, if you're going 40 miles an hour and then you're going above 20 miles an hour beyond the 40, that's excessive speeding. If it's a zone in the city, for example, where you're going 40 miles an hour or lower, it's 10 miles above. So you can't go more than 50 miles an hour in a 40 zone in the city, as an example. So I think that that's sort of reasonable and common sense, but they're really going after these repeat folks as well to have those devices installed. So, you know, safety, we have a terrible number of increasing deaths associated with our traffic in our state. In the legislature, this has been one of the top priorities around safety improvements, and we have not done a good job as a state. We're seeing really increasing deaths. So I think that's why there was momentum on this bill.
Absolutely. We'll continue. There's a lot of bills to kind of sift through. There's just a few that we just talked about that Governor Ferguson has to sign, so we'll keep a lookout. So let's turn to the beginning of the session, which began with Governor Bob Ferguson's inauguration. Ferguson was Washington's first new governor in 12 years after Jay Inslee, of course, served 3 terms. Here's our coverage from earlier this year in January.
Governor-elect Bob Ferguson had a moment for one last selfie before it was time to take office.
I, Bob Ferguson.
Ferguson is Washington's 24th governor, and after introducing the state legislature to his wife Colleen and their teenage twins Katie and Jack, he got right to business.
We face real challenges as a state and as a people. Our state is unaffordable for many Washingtonians. We rank 50th last per capita in number of law enforcement officers.
Ferguson says he supports providing free breakfasts and lunches to public school students and pledged to sign executive orders to streamline home construction. He also recognized Republican-sponsored bills he'll support, from increasing funding to hire more police and putting limits on a governor's authority during emergencies like pandemics, statements that brought Republicans to their feet. Ferguson did not pledge to veto any new taxes, but he said the state must look at cuts first.
I'm in politics because I believe in the power of government to improve people's lives. At the same time, we must recognize government does not always meet that promise. So let me be clear. I'm not here to defend government. I'm here to reform it.
Well, let me tell you, Governor Ferguson, here's your team. We're ready to work with you on that effort.
Republicans say hearing from Ferguson was refreshing after 12 years with Governor Jay Inslee in office.
Governor Inslee didn't paint that kind of picture when he gave his State of the State on Tuesday. He talked a lot about puppies and rainbows. But Governor Ferguson was honest, and I appreciate that.
They just hope what Ferguson said on day one won't be lost to history.
You know, now the test is he going to walk the talk? But he certainly, on day one, talked the talk.
So, Reuven, current Governor Bob Ferguson, you know, he's the first governor in a long time, but also he's not completely new in the political picture, former Attorney General. What do you make of Ferguson's first session? I mean, it was somewhat of a test, right? We're sort of getting introduced to his style and perhaps his political mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Governor Ferguson takes a lot of pride in being a chess player, so he's sort of always on offense. That's, I think, an important dynamic with him as both also not only a chess player, but of course as an attorney and former Attorney General, where he sued the Trump administration previously in 90-some times. I think the real issue is exactly right, which is it's a new job. And in that first session, when you're facing a $13+ billion deficit, you're facing a lot of new legislators with all of the federal uncertainty. And then you have to add on the factor that the governor's chief strategy officer ran into some issues and was forced to resign prematurely. So I think the sense was that it took him a little bit of time to get his feet on the ground. Now, obviously, all the eyes shift to him relative to the veto pen and the budget and the final decision on a lot of these policy bills. So there's no question that getting your staff up and running, getting the budget going, and really figuring out how to navigate the complexity of the relationship with the legislature is really challenging. At the same time, I think there's an appreciation for the uniqueness of an opportunity, as the Republicans have said, with a new governor after 12 years, and a recognition that his priorities are different, you know.
Do you think that Democrats were perhaps blindsided a little bit by the governor's, insistence on no wealth tax and all of that? And does that indicate that maybe the governor is here for the long, long, long haul? Like, he wants to really consider the Republican side despite some of the Democratic majorities?
It's a challenging question for the simple reason that the amount of taxes that were increased on the business community in this package of this $8.7+ billion package is very substantial. There's a lot of members of the business community, the Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce, the Bellevue Chamber, a number of other business leaders have issued statements in strong opposition. There's going to be some real surprises. So even though Governor Ferguson came out against a wealth tax, he also came out and expressed his reservation to a payroll tax, which would have been on businesses as well. But the business community isn't necessarily happy. Right? They're really upset about the magnitude of this tax package. So I guess the point is that it opens the question of whether the relationship with the Republicans will be better, the business community better. There may be citizens initiatives funded by the business community to really try to rein in some of the spending that we see from the state. So I don't think anyone's out of the woods here. I think it's a new day, and you just can't underestimate the issues around the uncertainty around those federal dollars and that federal budget as well. So the combination of the budget issues, the combination of the uncertainty of the federal level, and the fact that we just have a substantial deficit in our state, and the way it plays out is issues like Medicaid. Most federal money is Medicaid, so it touches people's health care.
One final thing that just to touch on, we see everything reported, but there were a couple of instances during the session that really kind of threw a wrench. We're talking about, of course, a couple of deaths that happened within the legislature. Could you quickly mention those two and just kind of wrap up how things went?
Absolutely. There were three untimely, unfortunate deaths during the legislative session. Former Speaker of the House, Frank Chop, was 71 years old. He was just a force of nature. He was one of the most widely regarded, but there was a lot of history with him, a lot of complexity in his work in terms of the impact that he had was just outsized and really difficult emotionally for legislators to have him pass away. He had just left office a few months ago. And then we had State Senator Bill Ramos from the 5th District, which is Issaquah on the east side, and he passed away prematurely last week, and that really shocked folks, of course, deeply unsettling. He was a leader in the transportation sector. And then on the evening before the end of the session, the wife of Senator Chris Gildon from the Puyallup area passed away, Autumn Gildon, and by all indications, she was deeply, deeply respected and loved. And so the whole legislative community, I think, was just incredibly shocked by this overall dynamic. And it put a pall over the work, and you can imagine, the emotional challenges associated with that. It had a real effect.
Absolutely, and we can kind of see that too in some of the reporting that Drew Nicholson had done.
That's right.
Well, the governor now has 20 days to look through all of this, and we'll have to continue following. But thank you very much, Reuven, as always, for all of your incredible insights.
Thank you so much.
Still a lot to go through, and we're going to be watching. Well, that's it from us at King 5. Thank you very much for joining us for our special edition of In Session. You can watch all of our In Session coverage and the latest legislative news right now on air on King 5 and on our website, king5.com, and of course streaming 24/7 on King 5 Plus. We'll see you next time.